The Unseen Watcher, a descent into madness. The rust-colored Ford Bronco coughed its last as it lurched to a halt in the muddy clearing. Rain lashed against the windshield, blurring the imposing silhouette of the cabin nestled amongst the skeletal pines. Inside, for figures hunched over, their faces pale rectangles cast by the dying headlights. Sarah, the organizer of this ill-fated weekend trip, forced a smile. "Welcome to Camp Blackwood," she announced, her voice brittle. The others shuffled out, their winter coats heavy with rainwater. There was Mark, the ever-optimistic one, already trying to coax a spark from the damp firewood. Then there was Emily, her quiet demeanor masking a fear of the unknown. Finally, there was Tom, Sarah's boyfriend, his gaze lingering on the dense woods that pressed in around them, a primal unease settling on his features. Sarah, her smile now strained, fumbled with the creaking door. Cold, stale air rushed out, carrying the faint scent of mildew and something indescribably ancient. The cabin, a two-story log structure, had a ramshackle charm, but closer inspection revealed peeling wallpaper and dusty furniture shrouded in white sheets. Inside, the flickering glow of a kerosene lamp cast grotesque shadows. The air hung heavy with the silence of neglect. Sarah led them through a series of cramped rooms, each devoid of warmth or comfort. Their chatter, forced and nervous, echoed in the emptiness. Finally, they reached a room with a massive stone fireplace dominating one wall. As Mark wrestled with a pile of kindling, a shiver snaked down Sarah's spine. Something here felt off. The rain continued its relentless assault throughout the night. Huddled around the crackling fire, they shared stories, laughter strained and forced. Sarah, usually the life of the party, found herself lost in a memory, a childhood fear of the dark, a recurring nightmare of being watched unseen. She pushed it down, focusing on the flickering flames. The next day was no better. The relentless rain kept them trapped inside, the oppressive atmosphere intensifying with every passing hour. Emily, normally reserved, started muttering to herself. Tom, his initial bravado fading, paced incessantly, muttering about feeling watched. Mark, their beacon of optimism, grew sullen and withdrawn. Days bled into one another. Sarah found strange symbols carved into the wooden beams, their intricate patterns sending chills down her spine. Sleep deprivation and the constant dripping of rain frayed their nerves. They bickered over dwindling supplies, their past grievances surfacing like ugly weeds. One night, a blood-curdling scream shattered the fragile peace. They rushed to Emily's room, finding her on the floor, gibbering incoherently, her eyes wide with terror. She jabbed a trembling finger at a dark stain on the wall that hadn't been there before. It looked suspiciously like blood. Panic erupted. Sarah, desperate, suggested venturing out for help. But the rain had turned the clearing into a muddy swamp. The familiar path vanished. Trapped with a potentially deranged friend and a growing sense of paranoia, Sarah noticed a change in Tom. He became withdrawn, cryptic, and seemed to relish the growing fear. One afternoon, Tom emerged from the woods, his clothes snagged and matted with mud. He held a weathered book in his hand, its leather cover damp and cracked. "I found this," he said, his voice raspy. "It's about the history of this place." The book detailed a dark ritual performed by a local cult decades ago, a ritual that involved summoning an entity they called the Unseen Watcher. It spoke of sacrifices, madness, and the slow suffocation of the soul. As Sarah read, her blood ran cold. The symbols carved into the walls, the increasing fear, it all fit. Fear morphed into a suffocating dread. Emily's screams became more frequent, her accusations wilder. Mark retreated into a shell of silence, his eyes filled with a vacant terror. Tom, with an unsettling calmness, started chanting passages from the book by the fireplace. One by one, they started disappearing. First, Emily, dragged off into the night by unseen hands. Then, Mark, his whimpers swallowed by the relentless rain. With each loss, Sarah felt a piece of herself dying. She was left alone with Tom, the flames in the fireplace casting long shadows that danced with an unnatural glee. Tom, his eyes gleaming with a feverish light, revealed his secret. He wasn't who he said he was. He was a descendant of the cult leader, drawn to the cabin by a twisted loyalty. He wanted to complete the ritual to appease the unseen watcher. Sarah, fueled by a primal fear and a desperate need to survive, fought back. The ensuing struggle was brutal, fueled by desperation and madness. In the end, Sarah, bloodied and battered, lay sprawled across the floor. Tom stood above her, chanting in a guttural tongue, a manic gleam in his eyes. But before he could deliver the final blow, a sudden, bone-chilling shriek pierced the air, drowning out Tom's chant. It wasn't a human sound, something inhumanly long and warped, resonating deep within the very bones. Tom froze, his face contorting in fear. Sarah, sensing an opportunity, scrambled to her feet, adrenaline pushing aside the pain. The room seemed to crackle with energy, the shadows leaping, twisting into grotesque shapes. A figure materialized across the room, shrouded in darkness. It was tall and impossibly thin, its form flickering like a dying flame. Tendrils of inky blackness pulsed around its edges, reaching out like grasping claws. The entity, the unseen watcher, turned its focus to Tom. It let out another ear-splitting screech, the sound scraping against Sarah's sanity. Tom, overcome with terror, dropped the book, his face contorted in a silent scream. The air crackled with unseen energy as the watcher reached out. A tendril lashed out, wrapping around Tom's midsection. He writhed in its grip, his screams cut short as the tendril began to siphon something from him. A sickly green light emanated from where it touched his skin, a horrifying display of life force being drained. Sarah watched in horrified fascination as the color drained from Tom's face, replaced by a sickly gray. As quickly as it had appeared, the watcher turned its attention to her. Sarah braced herself, expecting the same gruesome end. But instead of a tendril, a single, glowing eye materialized in the darkness. It pulsed with an unnatural light, boring into her soul. Images, fragmented and terrifying, flooded her mind, a writhing mass of tentacles, a cacophony of screams, and an unending, cold darkness. The onslaught of visions slammed into her like a tidal wave, threatening to drown her in terror. Her sanity teetered on the brink. Just as she felt herself slipping away, a voice she recognized from her childhood dreams, whispered in her mind, calm amidst the storm. Fight! Don't let it take you. Sarah clung to that voice, a lifeline in the abyss. With a desperate scream, she lunged for the fireplace. Grabbing a burning log, she brandished it at the entity. Fire, she vaguely remembered, was said to repel evil. The watcher recoiled with a hiss, the eye flickering momentarily. Emboldened, Sarah fed logs into the fire, building a roaring inferno that cast back the darkness. The entity shrieked again, a sound laced with frustration. It thrashed in the flickering light, the tendril loosening its grip on Tom's lifeless husk. It seemed vulnerable, weakened by the flames. Driven by a newfound resolve, Sarah grabbed the book Tom had dropped. Opening it to the passage he had been chanting, she started reading aloud, her voice trembling but firm. It was a passage for banishment, a sacred chant meant to drive away the entity. As she read, the room grew colder, the air thick with malevolent energy. The watcher lashed out, its tendrils whipping through the air, narrowly missing Sarah. But she pressed on, her voice rising above the hissing and shrieks. The fire roared, casting back the darkness bit by bit. The watcher's form started to waver, shrinking as it retreated towards the shadows from whence it came. Finally, with a last ear-splitting scream, it vanished, leaving behind a thick silence and a lingering sense of dread. Sarah collapsed, exhausted and shivering. The flames in the fireplace danced with a newfound warmth. Tom's lifeless body lay crumpled on the floor, a stark reminder of the horror they had faced. But amidst the devastation, there was a flicker of hope. Sarah had survived. Hours bled into days, The storm, as if mirroring the battle within the cabin, finally subsided. Sarah emerged, a shell of her former self, into the crisp morning air. The clearing was bathed in an ethereal sunlight that seemed oddly comforting. Days later, a search party stumbled upon the cabin. The sight that greeted them was grim. The bodies of Emily and Mark, and a disheveled Sarah, her eyes haunted by the horrors she had witnessed. When questioned about Tom, Sarah's story was filled with gaps, a narrative carefully constructed to mask her own disturbing secret. The truth about the unseen watcher, the cult, and Tom's true identity remained buried within the cabin, along with the weathered book. But the experience irrevocably altered Sarah. The darkness she had faced had left its mark, a chilling reminder of the fragility of sanity and the price of venturing too close to the abyss. Now, back in the familiar comforts of her own home, Sarah lived a life shrouded in a veil of normalcy. Beneath the ice, a chronicle of terror. Deep beneath the Antarctic ice, Dr. Evelyn Wright, a brilliant but weary astrophysicist, shivered in the cramped quarters of Erebus Station 1. The sterile glow of the fluorescent lights couldn't chase away the loneliness she felt for the bustling world of academia and the thrill of scientific discovery. Here, she was stuck with a groundbreaking but secretive project, Project Kronos, a giant machine designed to mess with time itself, funded by a shadowy group with unclear motives. Evelyn wasn't completely alone. There was Michael Harris, the stoic engineer burdened with keeping the station from falling apart, and the enigmatic Dr. Anna Petrova, whose past research bordered on the spooky. The constant hum of the machine and the knowledge of being miles from any help gnawed at their sanity. One terrifying night, the hum vanished, replaced by an unnerving silence. Panic clawed at Evelyn's throat as she rushed to the control room, finding Michael and Anna staring at the malfunctioning machine with dread. The readings were gibberish, a code from a nightmare. Then, a blood-curdling, inhuman shriek echoed through the tunnels, plunging them into darkness. A cold, unnatural wind whispered secrets that made their minds race. Driven by terror, they fled into the labyrinthine corridors, the unearthly shrieks getting closer. Michael, his composure shattered, confessed a horrifying truth. Project Kronos hadn't just messed with time. It had ripped a hole in reality itself, unleashing something monstrous. They stumbled upon a hidden hatch etched with creepy symbols, glowing with an unholy light. In the center, a swirling vortex pulsed, a gateway to a place beyond comprehension. A shadowy figure emerged, tall and skeletal, defying the laws of physics as it shifted and pulsed in the dim light. Its voice, a chorus of whispers from everywhere and nowhere, spoke of a realm beyond time, of forgotten gods imprisoned by reality itself. The scientists, it declared with chilling laughter, had unwittingly released them. Evelyn recoiled, the entity's words slithering into her mind like venomous snakes. A horrifying vision flashed before her eyes. A vast, starless void filled with writhing tentacles and maddening whispers. Panic fueled a desperate clarity. The thrill of scientific discovery seemed trivial compared to this existential horror. "There has to be another way," she screamed, terror and defiance raw in her voice. Michael, eyes wild with fear, shook his head. "The machine's gone haywire. The hole is growing." Anna, ever the calm one in the storm, stepped forward. "There might be a way," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "But it's a gamble." She led them deeper into the maze-like corridors, past emergency generators and forgotten storage rooms. Finally, they reached a sealed metal door marked ominously with the word, "Containment." Anna punched in a complex code, and the door hissed open, revealing a cramped chamber filled with blinking consoles and a web of wires. In the center, a device resembling a giant lightning rod crackled with ominous energy. "This is Project Doomsday," Anna explained, her voice tight. "A last resort failsafe designed to overload the time machine if all else fails." "But wouldn't that overload the entire station?" Michael sputtered. "It would," Anna admitted, a grim smile twisting her lips. "But it might also seal the hole." The weight of the decision pressed down on them. Overloading the time machine could mean a fiery death from within, but the alternative, the entity's horrific promise, was even more unthinkable. Evelyn looked at her now fearful companions, the only anchors she had in this desolate world. The thought of being alone in the darkness, surrounded by the entity's whispers, filled her with a bone-chilling dread. With trembling hands, Anna began calibrating the console. Every dial turned, every switch flipped, hammered a beat against the silence. The entity's shrieks grew louder, echoing through the tunnels, a symphony of maddening whispers. Just as Anna started the failsafe, a tentacle of inky blackness slammed through the open hatch. It writhed like a monstrous serpent, its surface pulsing with an unnatural light. Michael, driven by raw fear, let out a guttural scream and lunged for it, grabbing it with his bare hands. The entity shrieked in fury, the sound a physical blow that sent them all staggering back. Michael, his face contorted in pain, roared a challenge. But the flesh on his hands sizzled and blackened as the tentacle's touch seemed to drain the life force from him. "Go!" he rasped, his voice choked with agony. "Activate it." Tears welled up in Evelyn's eyes. Michael's sacrifice had bought them precious seconds. With a final, resolute nod to Anna, she slammed her hand down on the activation button. The station lurched violently, the lights flickering wildly. A deafening hum resonated through the chamber, building in intensity until it became an unbearable roar. Outside, the vortex pulsed erratically, tendrils of darkness straining against the growing field of energy. Then, with a blinding flash of light and an earth-shattering boom, the failsafe overloaded. The chamber dissolved into a whirlwind of sparks and superheated metal. Evelyn screamed, her body flung through the air. When the world stopped spinning, she found herself sprawled on the floor of the control room, the other two scientists missing. The air was thick with the smell of burnt metal and ozone. Groaning, she sat up, taking stock of her injuries. Luckily, she seemed to be relatively unscathed. A deep silence hung heavy in the air. Had it worked? Had they sealed the breach? She stumbled to the console and looked at the screen. It was blank, dead. The readings, the ominous red lights, all gone. Cautiously, she ventured towards the maintenance hatch, her heart hammering against her ribs. The corridor beyond was shrouded in an unnatural darkness. With a trembling breath, she reached out and flicked on her headlamp. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a horrifying sight. The maintenance hatch hung limply open. The swirling vortex was gone, replaced by a smooth, metallic surface. There was no sign of Anna or Michael, only a single scorched handprint etched into the metal. A wave of nausea washed over Evelyn. Had they survived? Had they trapped themselves in another dimension? A sterile metallic prison in place of the horrifying entity's realm? Or worse, had the entity outsmarted them, used their desperation to escape into their own world? Driven by a morbid curiosity and a gnawing fear, Evelyn inched closer. The metallic surface was cold and smooth, unlike anything she'd ever encountered. As she ran her hand across it, a series of intricate symbols pulsed to life, glowing with an otherworldly blue light. A wave of dizziness washed over her, images flashing in her mind, swirling galaxies, monstrous creatures locked in eternal combat, and a vast, empty void. Then, a chilling whisper reverberated through her skull, a voice tinged with amusement. "You have sealed the gate, young one," it rasped. "But the key remains." Evelyn stumbled back, her blood turning to ice. The entity hadn't been trapped. It had used their desperation to escape, leaving behind a cryptic message and a cursed key etched into the metal surface. Panic clawed at her throat. They hadn't won. They'd simply reset the game. Days bled into weeks. The rescue team, alerted by the sudden energy spike and subsequent silence, finally reached Erebus 1. They found Evelyn, a shell of her former self, babbling incoherently about an entity and a key. The station's readings were erratic, the containment chamber a graveyard of twisted metal. Evelyn was whisked away, her story dismissed as the ramblings of a traumatized scientist. Yet, late at night, she would wake from nightmares, the entity's voice echoing in her mind. She was free, yes, but the key, a reminder of their failed victory, weighed heavily on her conscience. It was a constant, chilling reminder of the horror they'd unleashed and the unknown threat that now lurked beyond the veil of reality.